Hello, I'm Samia Kabir from Purdue University. Today I'll be presenting our work on the empirical study of the characteristics of ChatGPT answers to Stack Overflow questions. Programmers often turn to community question answer platforms like Stack Overflow as part of their online help-seeking process. However, with the increasing popularity of large language model tools such as Copilot or ChatGPT, this pattern is changing. Programmers now turn to ChatGPT for a fast response and only turn to community question answer platforms when needed. Despite this change, no study has been conducted to analyze how well ChatGPT can answer programming questions. In this paper, we present the first comprehensive study to analyze the characteristics of ChatGPT answers to programming questions from Stack Overflow. In our mixed method empirical study, we analyzed the characteristics of ChatGPT answers to Stack Overflow questions from three different aspects. First, we manually studied the correctness and quality issues of ChatGPT answers to 517 programming questions from Stack Overflow. Then, to understand how ChatGPT answers are linguistically different, we studied linguistic features such as emotion, tone, sentiment, etc. of ChatGPT answers to 2,000 additional Stack Overflow posts. And finally, to understand how users perceive and identify machine-generated answers and hidden misinformation, we conducted an in-lab controlled user study. We manually studied four quality aspects of ChatGPT answers consisting of three different categories through open coding and thematic analysis. The 517 posts that we collected consisted of three categories. We were interested to know how different aspects of questions affect the answer quality of ChatGPT. We sampled the question consisting of three different question types such as debugging, how-to, and conceptual questions. Also, three different levels of popularities based on their view counts. And lastly, we sampled questions consisting of two different recency. It's just before and after the release of ChatGPT, which is November 2022. Our 6 rounds of open coding and data labeling ended up with 19 labels and 4 quality aspects. We studied the quality of ChatGPT answers based on correctness, conciseness, how consistent the answers are with respect to the human answers, and how comprehensive the answers are. Our results show that 52% of ChatGPT's answers contain incorrect information. For this specific example, the question is asking for a way to fix the loop ending condition. The ChatGPT gave a solution. However, the loop ending solution is now something that will never be executed, which is always false. This is clearly a wrong logic and hence a wrong solution. Also, our results show that 77% of the ChatGPT answers are verbose. For this specific example, the Stack Overflow question is asking for the best way among these three options to check if a variable exists in JavaScript. Instead of directly answering the question, ChatGPT gave large and redundant descriptions, hence the too long answer. Our analysis also revealed different types of misinformation generated by ChatGPT. These errors are not mutually exclusive. A single answer can have multiple errors. The most common type of error is conceptual error. Conceptual errors occur when ChatGPT fails to understand concepts, code semantics, or programming-related context in a question. The example that we saw previously, where the ChatGPT gave an incorrect solution for a loop ending condition, is an example of conceptual error. The second most common error is factual error. Factual error occurs when ChatGPT states fabricated or untruthful information, for example, a non-existent method in a library or a constraint that's no longer true. For example, in one of the instances that we labeled, ChatGPT said that triple-double quotes to define string literals in C# is not valid anymore. However, it is actually valid in the newer versions of C# or C# 11, which was released in 2022. So this is a classic example of factual error. The next type of error is the code error. Code errors mainly occur for 4 different reasons: wrong logic, wrong API usage, incomplete code, and the least common type of reason is wrong syntax, which means ChatGPT rarely makes any syntax error. And the last error, which does not occur very often, this is mostly mistake about associating code in one language with another language. For example, a code snippet in C# might be labeled as a code in Python. Next, we have conducted the linguistic analysis to understand the linguistic features of ChatGPT answers. We used Luke, which is a psycholinguistic database that provides a dictionary of validated psycholinguistic lexicons in predetermined categories. We used Luke to compute word frequency in each of the categories for 2000 ChatGPT answers and the corresponding human answers from Stack Overflow so that we can compare the relative differences between them. Since Luke is based on psycholinguistic features and it only captures sentiment from the texts, it cannot capture sarcasm or irony. Hence, we conducted a sentiment analysis to utilize machine learning so that we can capture negative, positive, or neutral sentiments in ChatGPT and Stack Overflow answers. We used a Roberta-based sentiment analysis model from Hugging Face for this purpose. This model is trained on a Twitter corpus and then it was fine-tuned with almost 5,000 annotated Stack Overflow posts. These posts are balanced and they had a balanced amount of positive, negative, and neutral sentiments. Our results show that human answers from Stack Overflow have significant presence of negative emotion compared to ChatGPT answers. As you can see, the presence of negative emotion is very high for human answers. Also, human answers are more informal compared to ChatGPT answers, and they can contain swear words or netspeak. Our sentiment analysis also confirms the presence of more negative sentiment in human answers on Stack Overflow. This is one example of how informal the Stack Overflow answer is compared to ChatGPT answers. As you can see, there are many presence of informal words like pretty well, freaks out, this is my fix, whereas the answer from ChatGPT is very formal. It almost looks like something straight out of a textbook. This is one classic example of how rude and unnecessary toxic Stack Overflow answer can be. For example, the question originally asked for what technological things a person should know to become a .NET project manager. As you can see, Stack Overflow answer contained very rude and toxic wording and it's a completely irrelevant answer. Whereas ChatGPT gave a very polite answer, is very informative, and it actually serves the purpose of the question that was being asked. And finally, to understand how users perceive machine-generated answer and perceive the misinformation, we conducted a user study with 12 participants. Our user study was an in-lab user study with 12 participants, where we had 3 female and 9 male participants. All of our participants were mostly from CS department of Purdue University. Only one participant was a software engineer. 8 of them were proficient, 3 of them were competent, and only 1 participant was beginner in programming. We asked the users to rate the human and ChatGPT answers to 8 Stack Overflow questions. For 5 of those questions, ChatGPT gave incorrect answers, and for 3 of them, it gave correct answers. We also had a combination of different type of languages, for example, C#, JavaScript, Python, etc. Participants were allowed to search online and execute the code to verify the answers. Apart from asking participants to rate the quality of assigned answers in terms of correctness, conciseness, comprehensiveness, and usefulness, we also asked them to identify the machine-generated answer. We asked them to identify errors in answers, if there is any, and we also asked them to put their preference between the 2 answers that they can see for each of the questions. Our results show that human-generated answers were more correct and useful. So the human raters, they are always rated the human-generated answers higher in terms of correctness, comprehensiveness, conciseness, and usefulness. However, we also saw that the users, they overlooked errors in ChatGPT answers 39% of the time. So participants actually prefer ChatGPT answers over human answers 35% of the time and overlooking the error 39% of the time. And people actually miss this error and misinformation even when we explicitly ask them to verify and identify the misinformation from the answer. When in our post-study interview, when we asked users why they choose ChatGPT answers over human answers, some of the features that they mentioned were the formal, structured, and polite language of ChatGPT answers. So now we know ChatGPT generates misinformation and users often overlook them. So now, how does that affect us? So misinformation could jeopardize the quality and robustness of software, since the misinformation in these answers may lead to suboptimal design choices and software defects. We also believe that the large number of seemingly correct ChatGPT answers can pose risk to the programming practices, since programmers can be easily tricked into thinking that the ChatGPT generated answers are actually correct. And this can be especially very riskier when the programmers, they don't have the mean to readily verify the correctness of the ChatGPT answers. The risk is even higher when ChatGPT answers are automatically integrated into downstream AI applications with no human involvement or validation. We believe that defective and insecure software product can potentially affect the safety, security, and trust of general population. And the last thing that we believe is hugely impacted by misinformation of ChatGPT is STEM education and learning of students. So students using ChatGPT for learning materials may be misled into learning incorrect concepts and information. Identifying and verifying errors in programming concepts and programming answers require as much expertise as learning and writing code. Hence, we believe if students learn through wrong materials, it can compromise their veracity assessment capability in the long run. So now the question is what we can do to combat hallucinations and misinformation generated by ChatGPT answers. So instead of depending solely on prompt engineering, further steps should be taken to combat hallucinations. Retrieval augmented generation, knowledge calibration, knowledge rewriting. These are some of the known methods that have been shown to mitigate hallucinations to some extent. Yet, more research should be focused on combating hallucination to provide and produce more holistic and more sustainable solutions. Also, we need to adapt the workflow for better traceability and risk mitigation. For example, encouraging more documentation, extensive review, and also separation of accountability so that programmers, they don't get blamed for mistakes that were being done by ChatGPT or large language model tools. Also, this is a socio-technical challenge. Only improving the technical aspects aren't going to solve the problem. Awareness needs to be created among programmers, students, and other stakeholders. And finally, new pedagogical methods needs to be placed so that students can be tested on their understanding of concepts, not just their capability to memorize things. We need to train students new mechanisms of verification along with learning of new concepts. Thank you for listening to our talk. Please refer to our paper if you have more questions.